Now that we have our poker database set up, let's go ahead and use it. Talking to the database in PHP is actually pretty easy if you know SQL. If you don't know SQL, that part is a little challenging, but there are some tricks you can use to make your life a little easier. So let's start with the login. So right now login is through this users.csv file. It has a username and a hash password. And over in database land, we have a users table, which has a username column and a hash column. So let's start by making some constants. And I'm going to right-click on includes and create a new PHP file. And I'll call this PokerDB constants.php. Users username field. Start there. Const equal, and then the name of that column, which is username with an uppercase U. Case is not significant though. And then const users hash field is hash. And then we need some other stuff to connect to the database. So to connect to the database, you need to know what server it's running on. And that's going to be 127.0.0.1. So this means the same thing as localhost, and you can actually put localhost here as well, but this turns out to be a little faster. And then you need the name of the user who's going to be connecting to the database. And I created a poker user. And then you need to know the password of that user. So I have to type the password in clear text, which is not great. But this is inside of a PHP file, so if anybody tries to access this particular page, they won't see anything. And also, if they do get access to this poker account, really they only have access to that one database. They can't change the structure, so not ideal, but it's not horribly unsafe either. And then finally we need the name of the database that the user is going to be connecting to. And that's also called poker. So that should be all the constants that we need for login and registration. Now we need to know what kind of SQL we're going to write. So let me go back to phpMyAdmin and show you a cool feature. So I'm currently viewing the users table, and if I go to the SQL tab, there are some starter commands here that I can start with. So there's select star. Select is used to pull information out of the database. And this star here basically is a list of the values that will be returned, columns that will be returned in the result. And star means everything, or I can list individual columns. And then after from, you have the name of the table that you're selecting from. So I'm selecting from the users table of the poker database. And then you can have a condition. So for example, where 1 is always true, so it will return all rows. And if I execute this query, here are all the rows in my users table. But that's not really what I'm going to want to do when someone logs in. What I'm going to want to do is just find the one record that corresponds to the username. So for example, I just want this Mark 5 row here. So let's edit in line, and I'm going to change this where clause to where username equal, and then the single quoted string Mark 5 single quote. And all SQL commands have a semicolon at the end, which is sometimes optional. Let's go ahead and execute this query. And here it returns only the row where username is equal to Mark 5. So note that SQL uses just a single equal sign for equality, unlike PHP, which uses equal equal or equal equal equal. So I have this row coming back, and if I just wanted to return the hash code, I could change the query again like so. select hash from users where username is mark5. And now I just get that one column coming back. Or I could also say select username, comma, hash from users where username is mark5. And now I have both columns coming back again. So that's the select statement that we're going to use to look up information in the database. And then we're also going to need a statement that lets us update or insert information into the database. So we'll come back to that in a second. Let's start with the select. So I'm going to include another new file, and I'll call this db code, actually poker db code.php. And let's write a function that we can use to look up the user. So if I go back to utilities here, you'll see that I was using this lookup key value, and lookup key value goes into a CSV file and finds the record where the key matches the first column of that record. And so I'm going to be doing something like that. And if I right click on that, double click to select, right click and say find usages, I can see all the places in my project where I'm calling lookup key. So I'm calling it from login right here. So this is where I log into an account, and I also call it from register right there. And then it's also called in restore session. So these are the two that I care about right now because they're the logins. And so I'm going to write a function to call instead of lookup key value, but it's going to hit a database instead of a CSV file. So right now it's taking the username, and it's also taking the name of a user account file. This version is going to take a username, and it's just going to look up information from the login file, so I don't need to pass that in. So let's go back to db code, and I need one more constant, so I need to know the name of the table. So let's go ahead and create a const users table is users. And now in code, I'm going to say function lookup user, and it's going to take a username. And the first thing we want to do is create a query that's going to look like this select statement that we had before. So I'm just going to go ahead and copy this, and I'm going to set $query equal to double quoted string paste semicolon. And I'll add the semicolon here as well for this equal statement. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to substitute the variable $username for this piece of text right here. So now the thing in username is going to get filled in with that. And I can also add a constant for users username field. And here I can add the constant users table, and this I'm just going to use star for this whole thing. Okay, so this is going to select all rows from the users table where the username field is equal to whatever I passed in as the username. Then I want to send this command, so this is just a piece of text, I want to send this command to the database. And here's how you do that using MySQL and MySQLi, which is the improved MySQL interface in PHP. So I create a database connection, which is equal to new MySQLi, and then I give it 4 parameters. I give it the host name, which is DB server, username dbuser, password dbpassword, and database name, which is dbdatabase. And then these last two are optional and I don't need them. So dbserver, dbuser, dbpassword, and dbdatabase. So that gives me a connection to the server, and then I want to send in this query. And so the way you do that, and this is using object-oriented programming syntax, which we'll cover next week. So don't worry overly much. But what this means is this is actually an object here, and then this arrow means I'm calling a method on that object. And a method is like a function. It's just attached to an individual object. And I'm going to use the query command for that, and I'm going to pass in the query string that I created. So that will send this command to the database, and then the database will return some results. So to get that result, I just do that. And then this result is going to be an object as well with some data in there and a bunch of methods and so on. It's actually called a result set. And then we're going to need a way of actually pulling the useful data out of this result set. So to pull the data out, I'm going to use a method on result called fetch array, and then I'm going to give it the type of array I want to fetch, and I want a numeric array. So I can have this return the first row, oops, MySQLi. So I can have this return the first row either as a numeric array with username in column 0 and hash in column 1, or as an associative array with the fields used as the keys. And since this array only has 2 columns, I'm just going to keep it simple and make it do the same thing as it used to do, which was return a row out of the file as an array with 2 elements in 0 and 1. So this should return my array, and that will be the return value for my function. So if everything is correct here, login should actually work if I change the call to LookupKey value. So instead of LookupKey value, user equals, what did I call that? LookupUser. And let's comment this one out. And then let's do the same thing here in register. And then I can ignore this one in utilities for now because that's the one that's being used for the session data. So that should be everything for login. Let's see what we get. I'm going to open a window and we'll go to localhost CIS 195p video poker, and I'm going to log out. And I'm going to try to log back in. So test me 3, test me. Okay, so call to undefined function LookupUser. So I have to include PokerDB code and PokerDB constants. So let's go ahead and do that. So there's my constants. And there's my code. And I'm also going to add these to login.php and to draw.php. I might not need them, but just in case. So go ahead and reload, continue, and I'm logged in as testme3. Try that one more time. Log in. Boom, worked.